about the nature of safety and navigating uncertainty and all of these big, huge questions about how we make our way around this
Yeah.
that we are all experiencing. So the impetus for this conversation, the inspiration, you and I ran into each other at an event again recently.
Yep.
And we started talking about psychological safety.
Yeah.
So I work in the business world on meetings. You work in the mission critical world. Would you mind just sharing quickly what that means? What does it mean to work in the mission critical world?
Sure. I work with teams that operate in decision-making environments of about 300 seconds or less, where the consequence of failure is catastrophic, so death or disaster. The reason it's 300 seconds is that's about how much oxygen you have stored in your brain right now. So if you're going to be doing medical trauma resuscitation or firefighting or tactical law enforcement, or you're a paramedic, or you're doing hostage rescue, you have to be willing to train a team to operate within that kind of time frame.
Which is a wonderfully focusing amount of time.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, one of the things, oh, that's unfortunate. People say there's a cookie prompt on the screen. I can't do anything about that, guys. I'm so sorry. But let's see if there's any buttons I can click for that. Nope, not a thing I can do about it. But we'll have our conversation anyway. So you're working in these environments where you've got these super rapid response times.
Yep.
And we were at an event and we were talking about the nature of safety. And recently here in the meeting innovation community, we ran an event on called Uncomfortably Safe. So about using improv techniques to help teams explore the areas where they don't necessarily feel safe. And you told me, you said, Elise, can you call it something else? Can you stop using this word safety because it doesn't mean what you think it means? So you want to share a little bit about what were you telling me? What was going on there?
Sure. So let's go back in time just for a second. So in my former life, I was a wilderness guide. My job was to take people into remote environments. People might know like Outward Bound or Knowles or things like that. So that's what I did for many years in my life. And in that world, and it's not the only world, but in that world, there's a thing called the risk paradox or the safety paradox. And what this is let's say you're a parent and you send a child to camp. And you call up the camp counselor and the director of the camp and you say, hey, I'm giving you my kid. I want you to keep my kids safe. And they were like, then why are you sending them to camp? Right? Because there's a paradox there. If that was a true statement, you wouldn't have sent them to camp. So you can't actually mean safe. Safe, right? It historically, from the Latin salvis, one of our oldest words, and I spent a bunch of years at Harvard studying the etymology and epistemology of these terms to try to understand, and that's my research, my doctorate work, is trying to understand how people learn to navigate uncertainty and how they think about risk, safe, and uncertainty. And the oldest definition of safe is free and secure from danger, harm, injury, and risk. And I'll say that again, free and secure from danger, harm, injury, and risk. If you actually tried to achieve that, you couldn't. It's a metaphysical impossibility. You can't actually achieve that status. What's interesting about that word is that if you go back a couple of centuries, the way that word came into popular vernacular, the way people used it was as a prayer. I hope when you leave here tonight, you are safe. I hope when you come here today that you come here safe. Meaning it was a prayer to send you out into a very uncertain world. It was only in recent generations, really, that we started, because of probability theory and others, things that we started having the hubris that we could make things safe. What we can do is make things secure, which is free from anxiety and worry. And we do that through co-construction. And so what I like about the word secure, and I know some people are like, well, isn't this just semantics? It's, as we'll discuss, it's about more than that, because it's about intent. Are you saying that you're going to make something safe for someone else? Or are you saying you're going to co-construct security with both people's sort of needs in mind? So I'll pause there, but that's how I think about it.
Yeah, I think that's actually what I wanted to dive into, right? So psychological safety, safe spaces, making it safe within our business environments is a huge topic of discussion right now. A lot of it stemming from Amy Edmondson's work, where she looked at psychological safety as the ability for an environment to be free from fear of reprisal. When you encounter error or risk. Right. So it's very much more about the definition of secure that you're talking about, as opposed to some sort of guarantee that you'll never be uncomfortable or you'll never encounter risk or harm or danger. So do you, when you make these distinctions, if you were to go back in time and work with Dr. Edmondson, how might you coach her to redefine that term? I mean, what is a word that you might use there instead?
Here's what I would say. Intentionally, directionally, she's right. So the idea is that if you're going to actually have authentic conversations, you need to create a context in which people feel as though they're empowered to speak their truth, in a respectful way. What I would say to her, to your point, is I would say, okay, Amy, I am a 6 foot tall, 250 pound white male, and I'm leading a meeting of a diverse group of men and women from nationalities and genders. Do you honestly believe that there is something that I could say that would supersede the historical context, the social context in which I'm speaking? Do you think that I could minimize reputational risk, social risk, historical, social inequalities? Do you think just by me saying some things that I could make that all comfortable? And the answer is no, I can't do that for them. But what I could do, I could walk in, own that, we're probably saying the same thing. That's what I mean about directionally. But I would say that so let's say you and I are in a room. I would come in and I would say, Elise, I'm not going to make this place safe for you because I don't know what that means. However, what I would like to do is partner with you to create a secure space so I can hear your voice. And so Amy and I are saying the same things. I just come at it from, I should say Dr. Edmondson. I don't know Amy. We just come at it from, because my world is necessarily more specific in these areas, I have to draw a finer line than she has to draw.
Well, and I think, I was just at the International Interdevelopment Goal Summit, where I saw her speak on the topic of failure. And her work has been misinterpreted as fail fast being a great thing. And she's working to roll that back. She's like, no, we're not interested in just failing. Society is not advanced when we make a bunch of errors, and isn't that great? It's about making intelligent risk and taking chances, knowing that many of them will fail, so that you can then learn more rapidly. So intelligent failure is radically different than just failing. Just like security is radically different than safety.
It's an interesting concept that you bring up, though, right? In conversations with Angela Duckworth, who's a peer of Dr. Edmondson, one of the challenges that she's had is that her research obviously is on grit. And often what people will do in their own normal human urge to create certainty is they will take a term like grit or fail fast, and they'll duct tape it on their checklist. And they'll be like, I think I know what this means. And you know what I mean? And I'm going to go ahead and apply this, whether it's correct or not. And so a lot of my colleagues in academia both spend their time producing intellectual property and then defending it and correcting it and then modifying it. And it's just this ongoing sort of challenge. But it does really matter, depending on urgency and consequence, the specificity of the language that you're using.
Right on. So speaking of, one of the things that you did in helping translate your experiences with mission critical teams to other domains, and for people who are just interested, is you wrote this paper on learning to navigate uncertainty. So it is available at the link I just popped into the chat for those who are following along. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk through some of the things that you've learned there, because, you know, one of the characteristics of the groups that you work with, as you mentioned, is they're heading into urgent situations with unknown outcomes in enormously constrained time periods. And those time periods are neither this nor that. They are these moments where the situation can fall either way. And the other word for that, of course, is liminality.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the consequences of the last couple years is that the entire universe of people here on our planet has been we've been thrust into collective liminality.
Yep.
So many people in the business world did not choose to join first responder teams.
That's right.
Like, they did not sign up to be, trekkers on the adventure of the unknown, and yet here they are.
Yeah.
So can we walk through some of the things in your paper that you have learned that help everybody navigate uncertainty?
Sure. And let me just color out or add some additional color to what you just said. So in my world, the way that liminality becomes really important is that if you're going into a burning building, you can't stay there. And the fire can't stay. The fire has to go out, and it will go out. It will burn out of fuel. If you're going to a trauma resuscitation, bringing someone back to life, you can't stay in that moment of liminality. There has to be closure. Either you bring them back or they die, but you can't stay there. If you're in a gunfight overseas, you can't stay there. Liminality is meant to be a temporary condition. The challenge that we have, and we're seeing this right now with the generation entering college and high school, is that 200 years ago, you walk out your front door, you walk into liminality. Everything you did 200 years ago was, do I make it home tomorrow? Oh, did we lose the presentation? Can you still hear me? Sorry.
I can still hear you. Yeah,
okay.
You're good.
So what's interesting about that is that we have to now think about how to prepare people to enter into a world where from time to time, they're going to have to step into a world, to your point, they didn't ask to sign up for. And that's kind of a tough challenge to make. But just as a reminder, it's not forever. It's meant to be temporary. So the idea is, how do we cross this river in time? Right? We don't stay in the river. And so what happened is that normally in a normal world pre-COVID, you might have never heard my name. If I did my job correctly, you wouldn't have heard my name. Because the teams we work with, in many cases, are teams we're not allowed to talk about. However, when COVID happened, what happened was many of our colleagues in emergency medicine, both in military and civilian, reached out to us and said, hey, look, we just need some help. And said, can you start publishing some of your research in ways other people can sort of get access to it? And so we started talking about liminality, risk, safe. I do this, and it gets back to our earlier conversation about Dr. Edmondson and Dr. Duckworth. People are going to interpret what I'm saying through their lens. And it's really important to say that when I'm speaking, I'm not talking about everyday normal life. Much of my stuff doesn't apply there. It's, for example, decision making. If you have to go and make a decision about buying a car, Elise, you have time. You can think about your options. You can prioritize your options, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? However,
not always a good thing.
Yeah, not always a good thing. A lot of research on that.
Time is not always good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you're going to work tomorrow and you turn a corner and there's a car accident and you have to get some kids out of a burning vehicle in 300 seconds, or they're going to die, and you have a group of strangers to help you do that, your brain doesn't operate. It doesn't buy a car faster. In other words, it doesn't use the same systems to buy a car to navigate that situation. And it's very difficult to just make it up as you go. And so, to your point, we wrote this sort of paper. And the first thing that, we talked about risk and safe, but the other thing we have to talk about is your relationship with error. So you had brought up, right, failing fast, or one of the folks spoke about
experiment quickly.
Experiment quickly.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephen. That's great. I like lean into learning. You know, something there's got to be like
That's right.
learn anyway.
So if you're on a tentative team, if you ask a group of people, any group of people, will you make a mistake today?
Hmm.
An error, right? Everyone will raise their hand if they're normal. So, and will you be sort of bothered, irritated, vexed, or annoyed by that mistake? Everyone will raise their hand. It's called irrational optimism.
Hmm.
And it allows us to get out of bed in the morning. But the downside of it is that we have this really weird relationship with error that we see it as a bad thing. What most people don't understand is that neurologically, your brain will not adapt in the absence of error. If everything's going, your brain's really lazy. If everything's going well, there's no reason for it to expend calories to change its structures, which is the physiological nature of learning. So you have to have error to learn. And if you're on a team of 10 people, you're getting on a minimum 10 errors a day. The only difference is whether you're going to talk to them, talk about them, or whether you're going to get lied to 10 times a day through omission. Those are your choices.
Right.
It's not a choice to have errors or not have errors. So you kind of have to change your relationship with that. And so what's interesting, and it gets to the point that Rabia, if I'm saying that right, just put in the comments, which is oftentimes there are corporate environments that are very transactional in nature. They want you to come in X amount of hours and produce X amount of things, and they don't want to see any variance or error. And they want everything to be safe, and I put my quotation marks so they don't have any drama. But I don't know if you've met any humans, but that's not the way we work, right? Like humans are they're just messy. And so you have to be able to collaborate and co-create shared spaces, or you're just going to you're going to have blinders on and not really understand what's going on. So I'll just pause there if I'm tracking your question.
Yeah, no, that you're right on tracking it. Absolutely. And then, you know, so my focus is on business meetings, right? The everyday opportunities to co-create our understanding of who we are, why we're here, what we're meant to do.
Yep.
And when people and teams look at those, they really want them to be transactional moments. They
Yep.
really want there to be some sort of simplified script, right? Standard operating procedure that if I do these things, the meeting turns out well, which of course, there is some of that element to it. And I think in your world, you have the same thing, right? Like there's some form of what we're doing to create security and to operate together that we want to move into automaticity.
Yeah.
We want to bake in and routinize it. So that we can put our attention on this other part.
Well, that's the part of the normal world which is very foreign to me because I spent all my time dealing with these folks, and we extensively use checklists, right? But we don't use checklists the way that apparently the normal world uses them. The normal world uses them for enforcement. They use them for like control. We use them to basically offload our working load memory. So we're going to automate those things that can be automated so we don't have to think about them because we have to anticipate future events, what's called situational awareness ×3, Ensley's work. So we're using checklists to account for the knowns so that we can spend all of our energy on the unknowns. When I meet people and they say, well, Preston, you didn't do 4-point B on the checklist. I'm like, yeah, the situation moved. And they're like, yeah, but you're accountable to 4-point B. And I'm like, no, I'm accountable to the mission, right? Like, I'm not accountable to the checklist. The checklist is a mechanism to help me do the mission. If I throw out the mechanism, as long as I'm moving towards the mission, we're good. And that I've been in these conversations where both of us are staring at each other like we're idiots. And because I'm so confused and they're so confused. And I leave scratching my head like, what am I doing here? What are you doing here? Why are we doing this? So it's a really interesting phenomenon.
It is. And the and that, you know, leaning into the checklist as a crutch.
Yeah.
You know, as an enforcement mechanism, as opposed to an enabling mechanism, is in fact one of the switches that needs to happen in both of our worlds for people to get to the performance they want. Right.
That's right. Yep.
So when I talk about helping teams find the right level of automaticity, which is the bit where your brain walks into a situation and just knows what to do without having to think too hard about I love that there's a poem about a centipede, and they asked the centipede to consider how to walk, and it found out once it thought too hard about it, it just fell over. Only put in poem language, so it was way cooler than that. but the habits that create the kinds of security are things like when teams walk into a room, they all say hello to each other.
Yeah.
They exchange a cup of coffee. They check in, hot washes, action reviews, those kinds of things. But before we get like too far afield, let's go back to your principles of navigating uncertainty and work through those. So principle one, as you wrote about it, is that where you look is where you go.
Yeah. So
talk about that a little bit.
So in skiing, in parachuting, in paddling, a number of other things, physically, where you look is where you go. Your body will go. If you look at risk and risk management, it's the same thing. If you look at the obstacles, you tend to aim at the obstacles. If you look at the opportunities, you tend to orient towards the opportunities, and the obstacles take care of themselves. Making a lot of generalizations here. Mm-hmm. What's interesting about this is that the traditional definition of risk, potential for loss, looks at the obstacles. It's focused on what can go wrong. In 2009, the International Standards Organization released another definition of risk, which is the effect of uncertainties upon objectives. And why I love that definition so much is because it changes the conversation. Instead of changing what we may lose, we're fixated on, well, what are the objectives? And then how do we account for the uncertainties? Which is a fundamentally different kind of a conversation.
So I think there's a huge, importantly relevant perspective in that for people in organizations right now who are looking at how do we change our way of working to deal with hybrid workforces and the changing in the supply chains, and then anybody who is also working in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
And the opportunity here is to look forward to where you want to go.
Yeah.
As opposed to always looking at what you don't want and punishing it.
Well, it's a great point. So I'll give you an example. So right now, you're probably familiar with Goldman Sachs has come out with a rule that they refuse to launch any more IPOs without women on the board. Now, what's interesting about this is that Goldman Sachs is not a bastion of liberal thinking, right? These guys are stone cold like capitalists. They're not doing anything because they like it or they want to feel good or they care about your opinion of them. They're doing it because the research is really clear that cognitive diversity is actually better for an organization. So what's interesting is that if your orientation is one of, so let me start here. We know that against rapidly emergent, complex adaptive problems, heterogeneous teams will always outperform homogeneous teams in the long term. Homogeneous teams, all female Guatemalan banjo players, will outperform them in the short term, but they'll run out of solutions in the toolkit. So if you actually want to pursue a long-term mission, you actually need a cognitively diverse group in order to have more tools in the toolbox. The best proxy for that right now is gender, race, all these sort of things, right? But what's interesting about that is that if you go to some straight up misogynists, right, in military special operations or whatever, and you say, hey, look, I want more DEI for social justice, they will ask you to leave the room. If you go to that same group of people and you say, folks, we need to accomplish that mission. To do so, we need greater cognitive diversity. They will solve the problems themselves. And I've seen this over and over again. And it's a really interesting framing from a fear-based or an adversarial-based approach to a mission-based approach, which is what are we trying to do? What's the better outcome, right? And then how do we do that? And most mission-oriented people will go there on their own.
Right. And in the business world, we don't always. There's a lot of reactive, fear-based. I see a negative consequence that we need to then put out a statement on. Put in some policies, control. So in terms of techniques in any team, ways to help construct a vision of where you're going when it isn't a canoe with rocks in the river. A couple of techniques: appreciative inquiry based discussion, right? So we're 3 months out, we're 3 years out. What does success look like? And then rather than trying to focus your energy on killing out bad behavior, how do you focus your energy on starting behavior that looks like what you want it to look like when you achieve your goal?
Yeah.
And then vivid visioning, which
Yeah.
is the same thing, only literally invoking the visual cortex in the party so that you can have a deeper sensory sort of experience of explicitly, when we get here, here is the story of what our lives are like. This is our vision of what this is. How do we positively act in ways that make that possible?
Yeah, but you're also constructing a narrative, right? Which is key to any community's ability to have an identity. The other thing that I would throw in there and add to your list, which I agree with, is gratitude. And so the research right now on gratitude is significant and undeniable. And what often I will say to folks that are in fear-based communities is I will say, I think you need to start intentionally having moments of gratitude. You got to start developing it as a discipline. And here's why, for me, it really matters from a neuroscience point of view. So one of the roles I have in my life is that I'm a visiting scholar at the Wharton Neuroscience Initiative here at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And what's really interesting is that I won't say them, information right now, information needs to be treated in the same way that food, drugs, and alcohol need to be treated. More is not better for you, right? Not only is more not better for you, but actually the wrong kinds of information will have the same impacts on your brain as the wrong kinds of food. And so if you're filling your brain with negativity, whether that's, we're all going to die of climate change, or the left is going to kill us because they're all snowflakes, whatever that anger and rage is provoking, it's really bad for you. And so you have to actually find ways to be intentional about your consumption of information, so that you can make gratitude a purposeful part of your everyday life.
So it brings up some work that I do in a volunteer capacity. I work with Braver Angels, and that is about helping people talk across divides.
Yep.
And one of the things that makes that work so very, very difficult is, in fact, this toxic information age.
Yeah.
So just being aware that, social media, the media itself, the what did you call them? Like stone cold capitalist part of that world, is radically rewarded by advancing othering. It's explicitly information that helps us paint other people as foreign to us, outgroup, non-compliant, acceptable people in our universe.
So what's interesting
which makes it really hard, because you have to find a way to get into conversation so that you can.
So what's really interesting is that it's important to note that narrative happens across the spectrum, right? Because you've got the othering that happens, and then you've got the catastrophizing. So like, they're going to take away your guns, and so the world's going to end, or the planet's going to burn up to cinder, and then we're all going to die. Nothing's for our children. It's all fear-based. And it's not as though there isn't truth. That's how these things happen. But it's about the idea that we get a choice as to what we consume and what we're going to do about what we can influence.
Right. Absolutely. And so one of the techniques that we train there, and that I think applies in intra-team dynamics as well, is an internal question where you ask yourself, why would a reasonable person act in that way? Say such a thing.
Yeah.
Right. So just assume that the other people that you're reacting, that have caused a reaction in you, right? But something they've done has gotten you lit for some reason.
Yeah.
And your jump is they're evil.
Yeah.
They're misogynist, they're whatever they are. So if you can take a pause and go, wait a second, why would a reasonable person possibly believe that, possibly act in that way?
100%. Yeah.
It has a fabulous, that asking yourself that question invokes curiosity. And in the brain, once you move into curiosity, fear-based triggers and signals go down.
Yeah.
So you get this opportunity to come into a place where not only can you maybe have a good conversation about it, but you're also not bathing yourself in your cortisol, adrenaline kind of poison bath
Yep.
as you walk into that situation. So that, that bit though. So how do you, when you're on these mission critical teams, your second principle is fast is different than slow, which has some implications. I think we'll skip that one, but I think let's go to 3, which is we cannot fix what we can't talk about.
Sure.
Because I think it's related directly to what we're talking about here.
Absolutely. So just real briefly, I want to tell you a quick story. So when I first got to the Wharton School, I worked there for 10 years. It was the first time in my adult life that I wasn't carrying a medical crash kit, because I used to be in search and rescue, and that was a big part of my life. And I walk in and somebody comes screaming into the office and they're like, "We have an emergency." In my world, if somebody says we have an emergency, that means that someone's bleeding to death or they've stopped breathing, right? Or a woman's giving birth. Like, those are the categorical sort of situations in which I need to move and move fast. So all that adrenaline flushed through me, and I got up and I was ready to go. And the statement was followed by, "If we don't get this email out by the end of the day, really bad things will happen." And I actually had to walk out and leave. And then I had to do a whole class with my staff on guys, there's a difference between fast and slow, right? Fast is 300 seconds or less, right? Slow is anything above that. And I just need to know what temporal environment we're in. So if you're going to have a crisis, I'm good with that. But you have to say, we have until. And if we have until 3 minutes from now, is different than 5 hours from now, 5 days from now, 5 months from now. And if I don't know that, I will literally lose my mind. And yeah,
go ahead.
So, but I was going to go to the 3, which is we can't fix what we can't talk about.
Well, you know what though? I love that story. I love that story about, is it actually an emergency, and what's going on with time? Because one of the great opportunities as you look at the meetings and the ways in which your team is communicating is to, in fact, become sort of deep time designers, right?
Yeah.
So, in your paper, you talk about basically conniving domains and complexity and navigating those realms in different aspects. But one of the other opportunities is to just literally manipulate time feel. So what you've done when they insert the word emergency for you is the time feel has focused in a very different way, right? You can craft in your team things that slow down time.
Yeah.
And it not literally, not the clock bit, not the measured sort of train based part, but the part in which we experience, which is the dimension we live in.
Yep.
Right. Things where you train people to have a stimulus come in that they perceive as an emergency, whatever that might be, and take 5 deep breaths, box breathe.
Yeah.
Any number of things can be trained into teams of all types to help shift our response and our way that we approach that time.
Yeah, 100%.
To make it, as you point out in your paper, time that we can use to do what we need to do, because we don't have to react.
One of the things there's a term called shibboleth. I'm sure you're familiar with this term. It comes from the Bible, right? It's a way for me to learn about different teams. And one of my shibboleth, one of my terms to understand where people are at is I will ask, how long is 60 seconds? Now, you ask a normal person, how long is 60 seconds? There's a lot of answers. You ask a woman who just gave birth, how long 60 seconds is? It's a very interesting reply. Ask somebody who's been in a boxing ring. Ask someone who's just survived something or just done surgery. Their relationship with time is very, very different. And that's, I think, what you're getting at.
And that, not only is that relationship different, but that relationship can be encouraged to be different, right? So when we are in collective, there are things we can do to synchronize our experience of time.
100%.
So when we feel that we have to rush, we have to respond, we are in some way pushed in the business world, knowing that time is not always marching in a way that's outside of our control is an enormous power that you can take advantage of.
Rabia, can you just let us know if your child is all right? I'm hoping they're all right. What you're describing, though, is really scary because you actually don't know how much time you have. And in those situations where there's urgency and you don't necessarily feel like you have all of the tools to solve a problem, and it feels out of control, then the answer there is what we train people is, and it goes back to your box breathing and some other things. You control for what you can to optimize your situation. So you focus on task, you focus on optimizing efficiencies, you focus on breathing. Yep. Yeah. Things like that. So it's in those situations you sort of prep where you can. I'm not one of those people that I'm a prepper. I don't have a zillion things. I don't even have a first aid kit in my car. But I know what I'm going to do the first 30 seconds in my head already of any incident that shows up. So it's pre-programmed what the first 30 seconds. And by doing that, I can buy myself some momentum.
Does it involve breathing?
It does. It involves many of the things you talked about. It involves breathing. It involves checking my watch so I know when the thing starts. So because time will change, it involves me finding out what resources. In some cases, depending on what it is, I have my phone out and I will quick dial certain people and put them on speaker so that I have a group of people that will then basically be flight directors for me while I'm doing whatever it is that needs doing.
Awesome. Thank you. So while we're talking about time, last thing on time. Hey, Preston, have you read this one yet?
The Time and the Art of Living.
Time and the Art of Living.
I've not.
Okay, put that on your list. It's
Okay.
Robert Grudem. It's a philosophy of the experience of time. So I think you'll dig it. And I've got the book that you recommended for me, Wonderworks.
Yeah, Angus.
Yeah. So let's move on. Let's talk about talking about what we need to talk about. So we can't fix what we can't talk about.
Yep. It actually comes from Alcoholics Anonymous and all those things, which is if there's something in your life that creates shame or embarrassment and you're avoiding talking about it, it doesn't make it go away. It just means you're not talking about it, right? And there's this idea that light is the best antiseptic. And so being able to find out what's happening in your life, specifically around error, right? And being able to have a conversation with people to say, this behavior continues to happen. Help me understand what's going on, right? Going back to appreciative inquiry. So by naming it and doing it not in a shameful way, but just in a, hey, like we're trying to get here. You keep taking a left turn. I need to understand either why that's happening and how to influence it, or we have to have a different conversation because I can't have you taking a left turn. But I first want to just understand that maybe you see something I don't see.
Right on. So the that ability to talk about what we don't talk about is, I think, critical for performance in all realms. Right.
Yep.
It's and actually it's the focus of a survey we're doing right now. So for anybody who hasn't taken it, I'm going to pop the link in. Take the survey, share it with all your friends. But when we train, we talk about this is about being in the meeting world, about finding your Brunos, right? So I don't know if, Preston, I don't think you were plagued with small children recently, but
No.
if you were, you had Disney's Encanto on repeat.
Okay.
Which is a movie about a magical family. And in the magical family, all of the family members have special gifts. And one of them gets a gift for truth telling.
Oh, okay.
Right. And is essentially shunned by the family, goes into hiding, and they sing a song saying, "We don't talk about Bruno."
Okay.
We don't talk about Bruno. And of course they have to find Bruno and talk about Bruno to heal the failing magic and all of that.
Right.
So where's Bruno? Where is Bruno in your system? What is it you're not talking about? Is it elephant in the room, moose head on the table, whatever it is, as people go to shift the way their teams operate, they'll go to training, they'll do the DEI thing, they'll do the meeting training, whatever, and then things don't shift.
Yep.
And the reason, that's the book. The reason things don't shift is because of whatever it is they're not talking about.
That's right.
So what techniques have you found to help encourage that?
So this is where our cultures might not align, and here's why. Is because in my world, regardless of what your skin color is, what your gender is, what your age is, if I'm in a situation where I'm responsible for other humans and we're working together, Elise, and for whatever reason, you're either doing great, and we're going to talk about that in a second. I need to find ways to make sure that I think you're doing great. But if you're suboptimal in some ways, I'm going to turn to you and go, Elise, 10 minutes ago, you did a thing. Why'd you do that thing? I need you not to do that thing. And what happens in that arrangement, in that dialogue, is our relationship is built on the idea that if you say, hey, Preston, I'll be moving at velocity to your side. So it's implicit in our relationship that you know that regardless of what happens, I'm going over the cliff with you. Like whatever the thing is, right? Life or death, we're going over the cliff together. So this is my way, and we see this a lot with trauma teams, is knowing when we're having what we call routine versus critical communication. And routine communication, there's going to be courtesy, respect, active listening, all these things. But in critical communication, if I utter my phrase is with me, right? Then you know that I've transitioned because I see a threat you might not see. So if we're in the backcountry, right, and I see you getting to an edge, right, or to water or to height, I'm going to say, at least with me. And if you don't move towards me, then you will find me being probably pretty aggressive. And in a routine environment, that would come off totally the wrong way. But in a trusted relationship, you understand that I am making sure you've heard me and you need to reply, because that is the agreement we've built. So in terms of routine environments, being able, like tricks for being able to do that is usually I'm going back early in our meetings and saying, we're going to be together for a while. I need to align my goals with your goals, right? And I'm assuming your goal is to be better than you were yesterday. And so I will often, if you do something, I will often ask, what you just did, does that move you to a better place tomorrow? Right? And I'll pose it in the form of a question like appreciative inquiry.
Right on. So that there's some things there that are definitely not to be assumed in the business world.
Right.
You know, clarity of directionality.
Yes. That's right.
And a clarity of shared mission,
yes.
And any kind of literally talking about the fact that you may not already be 100% awesome as you are,
right.
And therefore there's room for development and advancement. But those are things which can be ritualized in.
Yeah. So one quick story for you. So my job was to lead expeditions around the world. And when I got to Penn, we were going through our emergency action plans for kids to be hurt or injured or whatever. And these are college age and master's level students, right? Male and female. And I said, well, wherever we are, I will meet them at the hospital and I'll stay with them. And the lawyers looked at me and they said, well, you can't stay with them if they're female. And I was like, look at me. I'm going to be staying with them the entire time. We're going to have dialogues about it if they ask me to turn, to move away, but I will be within arm's reach. I will always protect their modesty until their parents or spouse tell me differently. I own that kid. And the kid's just going to have to be comfortable with that. And we had to go through a lot of dialogues, and there was enough times where it happened where I would literally be behind a screen holding someone's hand while they were getting stitches, right? But the reason was that kid's mine until somebody takes that kid from me. You know what I mean? Like they're in my space. And so the rules that are normalized everywhere else don't apply when it's somebody else's child in your care. So that's the difference.
Yeah, that's it. And that's a significant difference, right?
Yeah.
So, my friends who, do marketing campaigns.
Yeah.
And need to have authentic conversations with their new hires and their interns.
Yeah.
Are not in a place where that clarity of purpose and force of will are really going to be brought to bear in the same way.
Yeah.
That does not mean, however, that they should not talk about the things that need to be talked about.
Yeah.
So as we learn to listen into this and lean into this for our business teams, the question becomes, what might you do as you're beginning those relationships on a regular weekly basis that help construct some of that level of shared care and expectation.
So our mutual friend Sue Phillips, right, talks about this
Mm-hmm.
idea that every community needs a sense of connection and belonging. And one of my criticisms of corporations writ large have been that when these young kids leave college and go to IBM, fill in the blank, whatever, they're leaving home for the first time, but they're still kids. Like they're alone
Yeah.
and afraid in a big city or whatever. There needs to be someone that has the no kidding, hey, if something happens to you, right? Like you fall down, you have to go to the hospital, right? We're going to actually put together a package that you're going to co-create, but that we know that you know that somebody's looking after you until you get your feet under you. And that's something I think that we fail at because it's just a human thing to do. But we think, oh, we can't do that because of all the whatever. And I'm like, stop. Like, call up their mom if you need to. But
Right.
like do what you need to do, but co-create that so that these poor kids aren't, isolated for that period. And yes, it's a rite of passage, but we can do better.
Well, and I mean, frankly, Preston, as you were going from working with mission critical teams to leading groups at Wharton, would you not also have liked to have somebody there who was like, hey, if something goes wrong for you in
Yeah.
this new environment,
Yeah.
I got your back.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Like how do we grow out of needing to have somebody who's got our back?
That's right. And so I just think being able to explicitly see that, and which leads us to this next point, which is we can't talk about what we can't see. So we can't fix what we can't talk about, but we can't talk about what we can't see. We don't have language for. And so this idea that when I spoke earlier about the threat of information right now, it's a real threat because what's happening is people have this false understanding that if they're finishing 30 million emails a day, they're accomplishing something. Well, the truth is that that's not a true statement, right? That every time you sit at your computer, return information, you're trading that time against something else. And what we would tell you is that what you need most of all in times of crisis is human relationships. And if you're not spending a little time each day building those relationships, they will not be there when you need them. You cannot make this up as you go. Like true crisis is not something, oh, I'll figure it out. No one's ever done that well. No one. Everyone who's done it well has done it well because they practiced at it ahead of time.
Right. Right. So that practicing ahead of time, understanding what's in front of you so that you can move around it, the situation, building that situational awareness because you've got a network around you.
That's right.
That is helping you sense it, right? Leads to your next point, which is about, it says, we must spend more time on building our strengths than on trying to fix our weaknesses. Now, we talked about this a little bit before, right? And I brought up, the way I think about this is very much in terms of microbiology. So the other book I would absolutely recommend, if people haven't read it yet, is Never Home Alone by Rob Dunn, which is all about microbiology cultures within our bodies and our homes and whatnot. But in those environments, if you want health, you create a culture where health thrives, right? So to outcompete MRSA, which is a skin-eating bacteria, you make sure that there are other healthy bacteria that outcompete it so that the MRSA doesn't get to take hold, which is one of the reasons MRSA spreads in hospitals where they've got sanitized and they've killed all the good bugs, basically. Right. What do you see in your teams in terms of spending more time building our strengths than fixing our weaknesses that creates this inoculating culture against catastrophic error?
So I'll tell you how it happens on my teams. So one of the things that's really bad that my teams does, like one of the things we're working really hard on is if I put heart monitors on a bunch of Navy SEALs and I say, turn to the person next to you and give them 60 seconds of harsh feedback, none of their biometrics, either the sender or the receiver, will change at all. They'll be like, send it, and they'll take notes, and they'll be, thank you very much, and that'll be all. If I ask that same two people, and this is true for trauma surgeons, firefighters, if I say, okay, now take a next 60 seconds, turn to that person, especially men, Tell them why they're special to you, why you love them, and why they're amazing. They will go to near heart attack levels of anxiety. Most type A people are really good at giving critical feedback, but don't know how to either give or receive positive feedback. And so one of the things that we're practicing very aggressively on is teaching people that when somebody gives you a compliment, your job is not to evaluate the truth of the compliment. Your job is to basically acknowledge the kindness of the gesture. So what you're saying thank you for is not you agree that you're awesome. You're saying thank you that someone would take the time to do that. But just as importantly, you're role modeling how to take a compliment. And so when we talk about building our strengths, if we don't know what a center line is, we don't know what right looks and feels like, then all we're doing is reacting to negative feedback, and we're ping-ponging between the guardrails as we go down the road. It's not very efficient. So if you look at the great coaches, like the truly great coaches at professional sports, we've had some real luxury to work with, and the gray beards and the blue hairs that are just amazing at this, what you'll watch them do is you'll watch them as they're coaching a player. Every once in a while, they'll walk up to the player, they'll invade their personal space, they'll put their hand on their shoulder and go, that right there, that's what right should feel like. And that acknowledgement of, hey, this is where you want to be from your kinesthetic body, embodied place, move towards that, everything else gets easier. So that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that that acknowledgement of the importance of the embodied experience, right? And that tacit knowledge transfer that you talk about, that is obviously critical into the success of your world, but also critical into the success of our world.
Yeah.
So the bit where you can sit with a group and say something awkward, say something funny, run a conversation without a PowerPoint and be okay, right? Like, what does it feel like if you're actually listening and talking to another person?
Yeah.
Like that in the micro is in fact, an embodied experience that you need to lean into and to train into. So, practicing your strengths rather than your weaknesses. We're running close on the end of time, Preston, of the ones that are left. So that we've made it through 5. Number 6 is we need a team. Number 7, moderate our consumption of information. We've done that one. Body keeps the score, and processing the residue. I think, can we talk about processing the residue to kind of close us out?
Yep. And also just, I'm an introvert, and I recharge when I'm alone, believe it or not. But that doesn't mean that I don't need a team. I highly rely on one, but teams have to get nurtured and built. They don't happen by accident. Yeah. Residue. We have a separate paper. If you go to our website, Mission CTI, and you go to Teamcast, there are several Teamcasts, and one of them's on residue, and in the show notes is the paper on residue. And so you can reference what I'm talking about there. And the bottom line is this. If you choose what we would call the hard path, if you choose a life where you're going to be exposed to difficult or challenging things, you are not a victim. You are not a survivor, right? You are not somebody who is injured or broken. You are someone who's going to have some extreme experiences, good and bad, and you have to take responsibility for processing the residue that will come from memories, good and bad. These extreme experiences that overwhelm us, it is our responsibility to make meaning of them, to grow wisdom rather than to grow boulders that live in a backpack, right? What you want to be is you want to be the cool blue hair or gray hair, right? Who's sitting with your grandchildren going, oh man, I fought in the war and it was hard, but here's what I learned. You don't want to be the person who's the alcoholic at 40 thinking about committing suicide because you can't get through the memories. You want to turn those memories into strength.
So I know when we were at an event together, we saw some new research that says there's a genetic component to how well people do this.
Yeah.
To whether or not they're able to process trauma. But in the business world, in the rest of the world, we haven't been given an opportunity to opt in.
Yeah.
That choice was removed.
Yeah, that's right.
So, so trauma on. Now, how do we process that, and how do we process it together in in teams that in ways that are regenerative, that are leaning into our best and our strengths, that are building the cultures we want, as opposed to reinforcing or wallowing, creating narratives of victimhood.
So I think when we talk about Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning, right, we have to be really, really frank about what do we mean by trauma. And so, and I'll be especially pointed here and to speak to something very sad, which is a death in a school. So of a child's death in a school. It's one of the worst things a community can go through. That fatality will lead generally to one of two outcomes: a series of lawsuits against the school or an endowment in the child's name to grow a program. The question is why? Why does it go one way versus the other? And there's many variables here. But one of the ways is how we decide to process and make meaning of that loss. Right. What I would like people to start thinking about before they go quick to, man, I've suffered trauma, which is to acknowledge you've suffered loss, yes, but trauma is a life sentence. Is it really a life sentence, or is it something that we can learn from? If Viktor Frankl can learn from the Holocaust, I think that some of the challenges that we face right now, some of the losses we face right now, is fuel for wisdom, not a life sentence of pain. And I'm not trying to diminish anyone's pain. I'm trying to get people to understand that they get a vote.
Yeah. Right on. I have people I think we've all got people in our lives who carry their pain as a heavy suitcase on their head.
Yes.
At all times.
And it defines them.
And it defines them. They're like, I'm sorry, I so can't. I must carry my pain.
Yeah.
And the techniques, the strategies, the support to go ahead and put it down.
Yeah.
It's okay. Let's learn from it. It's there. It's a thing. But we don't need to actually hold it here.
That's right.
So in teams, the hot wash, the action review.
Yep.
The retrospective.
Yeah.
What happened? So what? What does this mean? Not only what does it mean in terms of acknowledging the loss and the pain, but also what does it mean in terms of what we have learned?
Yeah.
Where was the hope? Where, what is it Mr. Rogers says? Where were the heroes?
Yeah.
All of those kinds of things. That, I think, finding ways for teams of all types to build that muscle with increased rapidity would be one of the biggest gifts we could give to the universe right now.
What story will we be telling ourselves tomorrow about this experience? And how do we go about crafting that story?
Yeah. Well, and speaking of, Preston, thank you so much for coming and sharing stories with us. Is there one final story or thought you'd like to leave everybody with as we close this up for today?
I would say that in business or as humans, as adults, that we can always act as a mentor, right? And that there's this famous quote by Kurt Hahn, who invented Outward Bound. And he basically said, once you show someone they're greater than they thought they were, they can never look at themselves the same way. And so what I'd really encourage everybody on the call to do is just take a minute and figure out, how do I get to somebody and show them, give them an experience where they can be shown that they're a little bit more than what they currently think? Because if you do that for someone, it has a contagion effect.
Thank you, Preston. I think you are an amazing gift in terms of helping us all connect with something we can be better than we were before. And I am so freaking grateful that you would come and spend this time with us and spend an hour just talking through all of these things. I know this isn't your world. Your wisdom, though, is such a gift to everybody who gets a chance to experience it.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
All righty. Well, we will talk to everybody later. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Talking through all of these things. I know this isn't your world. Your wisdom, though, is such a gift to everybody who gets a chance to experience it.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
All righty. Well, we will talk to everybody later. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.